Today's topic is a good one because it's pretty open-ended. I think almost anything we say could be put underneath this topic of the timeless legacy of the autobiography of Yogi. Because timeless legacy, what are those things that are timeless? The eternal truths are timeless. Those things that live whatever age we're in, the equivalent from perhaps of the AY, those things that it reveals, those timeless truths, they're the same truths millennia ago, that will be the same truths millennia to come from now. It's those things that are eternal. And Sanatana Dharma is what the autobiography is. And as that expression goes, when I believe it was Swami Kriyananda, he asked Paramahansa Yogananda, "Sir, is this a new religion that you have brought?" And he said, no. It's a new expression, because there is only one religion, and that religion lives on. It's that the way that this world was created, the principles that underlie this world, its sustenance, and the way that, of course, all of us eventually, one by one, in our own unique way, outwardly, will find our way back to our true home. I say that outwardly because there's many different outward paths, but really there's only one true inner path back to God. We find our way back in that same way that connects every one of us, one person to the next person. We're all going to find our way back by uplifting, withdrawing that energy out from outward that's going out to the seemingly very, very real world around us, and we're going to withdraw that energy back in, and we're going to discover that the real truths that underlie this universe are discovered within ourselves. But outward things change. And somebody was asking me about our outward world that we see today, our role in it. And I said, yes, but it's all going to go. It's all going to go, and it's good to remember that. I would like to remember that we're here, we have to do our duty, we have to do what we need to do, but remember, this is not really our true home. Our true home lies in spirit, and we have to keep that in mind. That's eventually where all of us are going to, we're making it right now, and all of us will fulfill that journey ultimately to our true home in God. There's something that I read in Sri Yukteswar's writings, and he was describing what would be called Kali Yuga consciousness. Kali Yuga consciousness, and of course he goes on to say that whenever a solar system predominates in the solar system, this consciousness predominates, that's what describes, that system is described to be in Kali Yuga. I always found it interesting because he says any solar system, implying that there's others as well, just like ours, where people reside and they are at various levels of consciousness. And of course we know from studying these teachings that we've come out of that age, but yet we're not very far out of that age. And he describes what Kali Yuga consciousness is, and I think it's what really pretty much describes the consciousness of this age right now. He says it's when the mass of mankind in that system looks out on the world and thinks and perceives this material world as the ultimate substantial substance of this world. This is where reality lies, in this physical substance of this world. And when people have that perception, they're said to be in Kali Yuga. And we maybe are coming out of that, but I think there are many who still live in Kali Yuga because we see this world as very, very real. But he made an interesting point too. He said that inevitably through the influence of other people, influence of these planets and this planet going through the galaxy, and solar influences, galactic influences, all various different influences in your personal life. Slowly, what happens is you might say, this curtain that makes us see this limitation of this world begins to be pulled back a little bit. And it's as if you see the curtain here, and it is closed. Now, if I was to go over here and the wind was to blow it, and starts to look out there, and I say, whoa, there's something else out there. This has been my one reality forever. And he says, this is what happens to us. The curtain begins to be pushed back from time to time, and we begin to see that there's something beyond this physical world. He says, and this happens also through various influences and through our karma and so on, and cosmic movement of these planets and so forth. And that curtain begins to, as it begins to move back, inspires curiosity in us. And we begin to say, what's that? And we begin to question the reality that we had grown up with, perhaps, that we had accepted as the truth, that there might be something more. And that curiosity, deep in our soul, you see, because it awakens something in us. Because it seems familiar to us. And little by little, we want to see it again. And we begin to, it's somewhat not on the conscious level at first, but it's a craving of the soul. And slowly, slowly, we begin to question further the reality that this is the ultimate substance. And this happens naturally to all souls at some point in their cosmic evolution, that this curtain begins to pull back until finally we want to pull that curtain back itself and look out and see what's out there. And this quest to pull that curtain back becomes the primary, predominating impulse in our life. And we want to know. And this is when we start to push. Now, I remember many years ago, I had an experience. Before I came to these teachings at all, I knew nothing of these things. I was in college, actually, and I went to a party, as college kids do, and went late, 2 o'clock in the morning, or whatever it was late. And the party ended, and I was at a couple of friends, they were married, and I was at their house. It was too late to go home. I could have gone home, but I was tired. So everybody left, and I just laid on their floor, laid on the floor, and went to sleep on the carpet on the floor. And I woke up in the middle of the night. It was maybe 2 hours later, must have been 4 in the morning. I woke up, and I was in now I know what I would describe it now is as a superconscious state. You sometimes fall into these states when you're, and I never really had any experience like this. I woke up and I was in this state, and I began to think of all my friends who were at that party. And the couple that lived in the house, I thought of them in the bedroom and they were sleeping, and I kind of mentally surveyed all of these people, and I felt just this heart-bursting love for every one of them. I just said, I just love you so much. You're just dear to me. And I could see them in a way that I had never seen them before. As souls, people who somehow had been tied to, and I was just bursting with this love, this feeling of love for my friends. One by one, I surveyed them all, then just kind of went out from there and started thinking of other people I knew, my family, and I was just in this state. And in that state, I then drifted off back to sleep. But I woke up in the morning, 2 hours later, and I said, that's what I want. It was so real to me, and it was real. That's what I want. Now, that became a motivating factor for me in my life. And I said, that's what I want. I want that. How do you get that? Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say, it was not very helpful to my scholastic studies, because I began to drop those. My interest was that I went to class, but I just was not interested so much, because that wasn't going to give me what I really wanted. But of course, then, a couple of years, at least 2 years later probably, I ran across that Autobiography of Yogi. And I picked it up, and you'll see this movie we're going to show the answer tomorrow. And there's a scene in there just where that was me Swami's bought the autobiography, he's taking it home and he's reading, he's on his bed, flipping the pages, this big smile on his face. And he's just going through it. It's like he discovered something. And I said, that was me right there. And I went right through that book. My stupid roommates would come out and kid me, like, you know, it's about that Baba Louie fellow you're talking about all the time. And I learned to keep myself quiet because they just made fun of me. But I recognized something in there, and what I recognized is something that seemed so familiar to me. It wasn't like it was new. It was new, but I recognized it. It was something that was similar to that feeling I had, and I began to awaken that feeling in my heart. And that's timeless. And I bet that same feeling is going to be awakened in hearts 10,000 years from now. Or maybe I have to go a whole new Yuga cycle. To the next time when we're at this point, then they'll have to awaken. I bet it awakened in you some of that feeling too. Somehow you were touched. Something touched you. Something touched me. And that's timeless. That's not limited to any one person. It's not, it wasn't me personally. It was something, a vibration that was put into that book that was touching people. And Master said, I put my vibrations into it. And that's what we felt. That's what all of us felt. And that's what I felt. And these timeless truths, that's going to be the legacy of those truths. That is the legacy. Those truths that are timeless and immortal, that will awaken people to pursue those truths and pull that curtain back from this delusion that this world is the ultimate reality, that there's something more behind that. And that's what the power that book gives. And I think if I could sum it up, since I only have 15 minutes, and I always get carried away. But to sum it up, I would say that book, Awakened, is a timeless legacy that lives always. That legacy, and it awakened hope in my heart. Hope had been simmering there. There's got to be something more in this life. Yes, I can go and I can get my degree and I can go and do interviews, which I did, and they were so, I won't go into those stories, but they were so depressing. I'm going to sign my life away. Oh my God, I can't do it. And it gave me hope that there's something more. There's an avenue, there's a way, there's a street to be able that I could follow this, and I can recapture that my soul has been wanting. And I look back on my life and I said, yes, I had that experience in my friend's living room floor. But you know, it's so then as I began to think about it, I thought, I think I remember when I was a kid. I used to think these things too. And these thoughts began to awaken. Memories began to, as I read the autobiography, I began to remember. Yes, remember when you used to be a kid and you used to think this and think that. And all of this began to come back. And it gave me hope that there's something more. Hope for a better world, for me at least, if I would follow that. And it's true. When that awakens in you, it's a danger. Parents don't like that in their children because you start following it. And you can't help it. You follow it. And this is what all of us, ultimately is our destiny, to follow that string. Don't lose, if I could implore myself, it's so easy to forget at times. We fall back into the somnolence of forgetfulness and indifference. And we forget, we keep that hope alive, because there is a way out of this delusion. And this is what Master brings, and this is what this legacy will bring. And it's going to awaken that legacy, souls from here, who knows how long. Yes, the form changes, culture is going to change. His autobiography is set against the background of early 1900s. Yes, that's going to look old-fashioned in time, but the truths that underlie that are eternal. Just as you read the lives and the biographies of great saints 1,000 years ago, it's still the same story. And it's the same story. So keep that hope alive. And when you feel that, when you have those inspirational moments, and all of us will, no matter how long we meditate and seemingly nothing happens, God's grace will come. Guru's grace is come if we keep that in our heart. And little seeds are awakened in our heart. So keep that hope alive and be confident that those will be awakened in you too, because we're Guru's disciples, we're Master's disciples. Babaji and the great ones were their disciples, and they're there ultimately to usher us back, each of us, to our true home in God. Many blessings to all.
Hello, friends. It's a joy to share with you today this fantastic book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I didn't, as Jaya was saying, I didn't know anything about India or karma and incarnation, as you'll see in the answer tomorrow, Swamiji's life as well. But as I looked in the eyes of Master on that book, and as I read it, and as I looked at the saints and the masters in there, I just felt I felt a bond from other lifetimes. And then as I came onto the path, it was like that. The curtain started opening and I could see more and more. And then I was remembering, this morning as I was sitting here during the class, I was looking outside, and I was just thinking of the chants of masters when I started practicing these teachings, and I started singing them, and I was thinking about different ones. I am the sky, I am the bubble, I am he, I am he, I am Om. They were all about expansion beyond your little self. I mean, it wasn't I am me, I am me. It was like I am he. And just the thought of getting outside of yourself was just such a wonderful feeling. And then I was just recalling how the thought of expansion and going beyond your little body and your little personality, this is why he wrote that book, your little race, and I'm from India, and I'm from America, and I speak this language, and I speak that, and there's a very cute story about Master with his disciples. He said, well, don't want to be attached, because if you're attached to apple pie, you're going to have to be born in America. You're attached to eating curry, you have to be born in India. And so there was one disciple, and he was eating curry every day. And Swamiji said, well, I thought you didn't like curry, but I want to be born in India. You had to come back. Master's teachings would just break you out of all of that. And in this book, he just teaches how to know God. And what a thrill when you read that. Because before Autobiography of a Yogi, these teachings were people who, in the Himalayas somewhere in a cave who, not everyday people. We're talking about knowing God and experiencing God and doing practices to find God in everyday life. Autobiography of a Yogi brought that out. Or there were saints in monasteries, people hidden away who were doing practices. Or when I grew up in the Baptist church, it was all about the ancient people, and Jesus, and I was very close with Jesus in my heart, and then Moses, and then the stone tablets, and then all these things, and I would always think, isn't there anybody else? Moses, there's so much. There's got to be somebody else, and then breath of fresh air. Autobiography of a Yogi. Here was somebody of our times who had experienced God, who knew God, who talked to God, who saw God, and who told you too can have this experience. I mean, who spoke like that? And Master talked about Divine Mother being all around you. He was out the desert once, I think it was, between 29 Palms, and he was saying, this is the kingdom of Om. Om Kali, Om, don't you hear her voice? And I mean, he said, God is nearest of the near, dearest of the dear, closer than your breath. And he talked of hearing Divine Mother, and he talked of seeing the Divine this. And Master, he had a vision of the Divine Mother, one of the Christmas meditations, and he said, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful. Don't go, don't go. And then he said, oh, these people's materialistic thoughts are driving her away, but he was seeing her. He heard her, he saw light. And what was so wonderful is he's told everyone, this can be your own experience. And this is what Master came to bring, that this too is your experience. And so then you look in the Autobiography of a Yogi, and when I read that, I was so thrilled. And who was levitating? I didn't know anybody levitating, but at least he said it, and I believed it. And who had a second body? But Ananda. But it was just thrilling to know that you could get out of this little world and this little reality and see that there was another reality. And Gary Bala, who didn't eat for 50 years, Teresa Neumann, all the healings in Autobiography of a Yogi, and the resurrection of Swami Sriteswarji, and Rama raised from the dead. I mean, these were just thrilling stories, and anybody who reads them, and it just has to thrill your heart. But I remember I was at Old Bookstore recently up in Delhi, Gurgaon, and I was looking at the different books, and there was an Autobiography of a Yogi that was put out by the Old Bookstore. So there were a couple of ladies there, and one lady was saying, this book is just pure fantasy. He didn't do any of those things. And I was standing there, and I was just kidding. I was about to react. Not I just called myself. And I was inwardly praying, Master, should I say something? And I was so reactive, he said, no, don't say anything. So I walked away, and I was looking at other books, but I was just thinking, I just got to tell these ladies. So he set me up at the counter. There they were, and there I was, and I just said, excuse me. By then I was more calm, and I said, I heard you speaking of this book, Autobiography of the Yogi. That happens to be my guru. Ooh, man, I'm so sorry. I said, I actually have followed his teachings for 40 years now, and actually teach his teachings, and I would say, why don't you read that? Have you read the whole book? Oh no, we just heard about it. I said, why don't you read it? You might find some, okay, we'll read it. But you see people, they don't know. But as you begin to read and practice and experience, you begin to see the truths in your own life. So we look at, why did Master write that book? Well, one, to break the image that we're these little beings, we have a small life, this is, we're here to just live from day to day, go to work and die, and that's it. He came to break that for all those who would listen. And he came to bring this new thought for a spiritual life. And even here in India, I've talked to so many people. Jaya and I toured around India, as you know, for the past 12 years or so. And we almost always asked in our lectures, how many have read Autobiography of a Yogi? 80% of the people. But then they say, well, we didn't know what to do afterwards. We read the book, but we didn't know what to do. And I was thinking that the spirituality that's in India now, a lot of it is, and you all correct me, but I see a lot of people coming forth now wanting to go within, wanting to meditate, wanting to go to the essence of yoga, the essence of religion, and not only doing puja and arti, going to mandir, going on a pilgrimage. And these are all wonderful. Going bathing in the Ganges, go to Kumbh Mela. I love this sweet story about bathing in the Ganges. That there was some saint that said, well, you might get rid of your sins as you're there bathing, but they wait for you in the trees. So you come out and they jump all over you again. And this is the thing that, what I remember Master talked to this Catholic, I don't know if it was, and from there, the rest is history. And I learned Master's techniques and so forth, and I added it to my life. That's the thing. Master saying, add it to your life. You don't have to leave everything, but bring God. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. I think that was the biggest message of his whole book. And all these things shall be added to you. So I'll close by saying, when I read that and I saw saw his pictures, I saw the pictures of Babaji and Lahiri and all the great ones. What I said, even as a youth, I mean, I didn't know anything about anything, karma and all these things, I just said, I want to be like them. That's my life. No matter what I'm doing, if I have a job, if I don't, that's who I want to be. I want to have those eyes and that posture and that vibration and have control over my emotions and control over my energy. That's what I want to be like. And I think that's why Master wrote. So we read it and we go, that's my life. And you bring it into your daily life and your daily existence. And that's the way we find God. So God bless you all.
I'll pick up right where Dhyana left off, because what makes the autobiography a really special book? I mean, Swami's got a shelf full of books there. You probably have a shelf of books at home. You've probably read hundreds, if not thousands, of books in your life. What makes one book have the potential to change your life when all those other thousands don't have that power in them? It's because Master presents in there a picture of a world that you know resonates in your heart as being true, and in your own mind you want to say, I want that. I want to be like that. I want to experience that cosmic consciousness. I want to experience that universal love for everybody. And that book has the power to motivate an individual to take action beyond just reading it. And that's the real power of it. Otherwise, a book is just paper with ink on pages, and it sits on a shelf, and it doesn't have any power in and of itself. Although I'm not so sure that that's true of the autobiography of a yogi. I know of stories, one story where somebody was moving a box of books and it was kind of full, and a book fell off and hit him in the forehead, and he kind of got stunned a little bit and picked it up and said, oh, this is interesting. And it was the autobiography of a yogi. I know of another instance where a young man had seen the autobiography of a yogi, but he didn't like the face on the cover, didn't like that picture. That most people are very attracted to it, but for whatever the reason, he didn't like it. So later on, he was doing a service project, and he was helping clean out an attic in a college kind of boarding house. And so the students had left stuff up there, including boxes of books. So he was moving this box of books, and there was a book that didn't have any cover on it, and he somehow started paging through it, and gee, this is interesting. Oh my, that's really, I like that. Then when he got to the picture, of course it was the picture of Master. So, I think Master can make that book hit you in the forehead, or he can rip a cover off it. So I'm not sure that book in and of itself doesn't have some power. But generally speaking, the point is that a book itself doesn't have power. What is the legacy of the autobiography of a yogi? The legacy is that book has motivated millions of people to take the next step. And once people start engaging in the next step, once they find that this book changes their life and they start talking about it, then that book has the potential to go on in time and space for a long time. The Bible Christian Bible is one of those, because the words of Jesus resonate with people and make them want to change their life, uplift their lives. And when they do, they get happier. We were one time on a pilgrimage in the Holy Land, and we were on, it's called the Mount of Beatitudes. It's where Jesus essentially delivered a beautiful lecture, which is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs shall be the kingdom of God, and so on. You may or may not have heard that, but we were there, and there was a little chapel, and we meditated for a while, and then we went out in the garden, and we read that passage from the Bible, because this is the place that it had taken place. It was very inspiring and uplifting. And we went back into the chapel, and we were meditating, and then we heard kind of murmuring going on. And there were groups all over that garden, some reading it in Japanese, others in German, others in Spanish, and so on. And we realized that people had come to that garden from different parts of this planet, and they had read those words over and over and over again, probably for centuries. Well, words like Master put in Autobiography, the timeless truths, the ones that we recognize, our soul recognizes as being something that describes the world that we cannot see. Those books, very few, they have power. But the real power of the Bible is not the Bible itself, it's the changed lives and the passing down of that change from one person to the next to the next. So the real legacy of Autobiography of a Yogi is that that book becomes living in you, and it becomes living in me, and we begin to share that vibration with others. And so the real legacy of Autobiography of a Yogi is the change, the potency that it has to change consciousness of individuals. And we have a certain responsibility to do the best we can in our lives to live by the high truths that we find in there. Because then our life begins to become shaped by the words of Master, by the consciousness of Master, by that book. And if our life becomes shaped by that book, then our lives have the power of his consciousness flowing through us. And then we have the potential to help awaken others. It just as that man sitting on a bench meditating had the power to provide the next step for Dhyana. And if we read that book and are moved by that book and live according to the degree that we can, according to the principles of that book, then that book is not just printed in 1,000,000 or so copies of the physical book, it's printed in 1,000,000 hearts. And those 1,000,000 hearts that are vibrating with that have much greater power than the book itself. The book, we have to refer people back to the book because it's packed with so much wisdom. But the real legacy of any great scripture is that it makes the jump from the pages of a book to the hearts of the individuals who read that and changes their lives and uplifts them. And so the autobiography has that power. It's going to go on and on and on for centuries, unlike most books on most bookshelves that a few years from now, Swami one time went into a bookstore and he said, I'm depressed by this. And we said, what? He said, there must be 100,000 books in this bookstore. What does my little offering into that stream of volumes, what difference is it going to make? Well, it's going to make a difference because hardly any of those books are going to make the leap from the page to the devotees' hearts and the devotees' minds or the seekers' minds. And the autobiography, the works of Swamiji, and great books make that leap. So they've awakened us, and through us they can help awaken others.
We heard a story a few years ago of from a man who was a disciple of Master, became a monk for more than 20 years as a disciple of Master. And we were asking him, how did he find out about these teachings? And he grew up in Southern California, near Encinitas actually, where Master has his, as he called it, his seaside hermitage. And he was going to college, and he had a job as a waiter to earn money to work his way through college. And so it was a busy evening in the restaurant, and he was serving the meals to all the different patrons. And then he just was walking by a table. He was carrying a tray to bring it to another table, and he heard two people were talking. And he heard one of them say, Paramahansa Yogananda. And he just stopped. He said, I didn't know if it was a food. I didn't know what it was, if it was a movie that was coming out. But I heard those words, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I just stopped in my place. I put the tray down. I turned around and said, what does that mean? What is Paramahansa Yogananda? And they said, come sit. And they began telling him, and he said that was the moment that his life changed, just hearing Master's name, not knowing what it was. And so if that name alone could have that impact, a book filled with the Master's words, his vibrations. But there's two things that I will share with you that I think are the most powerful in the book. First, let's begin with the very first sentence. The characteristic features of the Indian culture have long been the search for eternal verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. So when you read, so the first point I want to touch on is the guru-disciple relationship, because that theme is throughout the book. And Master makes it very clear that it is through the agency, and only through the agency, of a guru and the giving to the sincere disciple that God can be found. And that is echoed and echoed throughout those pages. And when you, for me, if I only, well, I won't say that because but years in my Master's hermitage, you feel the bliss. You feel the soul, the safe harbor of the soul finding his security at his guru's feet. In this case, Master and Sri Yukteswar. But it's true for all of us. I know for myself, where would I be without having found Master? My life would have been dust through my hands, sand through my hands. I would have had a career, I would have done this and that, but I know it would have, who I am would never have been actualized if I had not found my guru. And so the guru-disciple relationship, to awaken that in people, whether Master is your guru or not. You know, people, we mentioned this the other night, people would sometimes come to Swamiji and say, well, I want to find my guru, but I'm not sure if Yoganandaji is my guru. And Swami just would tell them, why don't you take him as your guru, who will either manifest or he will lead you to your guru. And so take him as your guide to your deeper spiritual life. Once people took that step, very few of them went elsewhere. But Swami didn't want to proselytize. He didn't want to say, oh, you must go my way. He just said, try this and see. So, and you know, you're very fortunate growing up in this culture where the guru-disciple relationship is respected and understood. In the West, it's an uphill battle. People, oh, what do you need a guru? Oh, you know, and it's demeaned, and it's not respected in the same way. And people say, oh, yoga's fine, meditation's fine, but you don't need a guru. One of the most popular New Age magazines in the West called Yoga Journal, very much anti-guru, any guru. You know, you can do it, you do yoga, you do meditation, you don't need a guru. And so the disciples of Master are very much out of step with that part of Western culture that says you can do it on your own. And once you become a sincere disciple, you know, there's no way I can do this on my own. So that's one of the rich nuggets in that book. And that speaks to us on a very personal level. And I've often used this book over the years when I was going through difficult times. I would use it like an oracle. I would say, Master, I have a question. I don't know what to do here. And I would open it up 3 times and just put my finger wherever it fell. Sometimes it would take the 3rd page. But the answer was so shockingly pertinent to what my question was that it just, I could hardly believe it. So again, how can a book, how could ink on paper do that? Because it's not that, it's a conscious vibration for all of the disciples. But then there's this other aspect. There's a chapter where, it's the chapter Rama raised from the dead, which starts off where Sri Yukteswar has his disciples around and Master's there. And he says, would you like to hear a story about my years with Sri Yukteswar? And they'll say, oh, yes, Master, yes, because he was not very forthcoming about those stories. And so then he tells the story, I won't go into it here, how Lahiri Mahashaya raised his friend Rama from the dead. But then he goes on to say that Lahiri told Sri Yukteswar, I will send you a disciple, and 50 years hence, he will write my story. Lahiri is saying this to Sri Yukteswar. He will tell the story of my life for the Western world. And then Master takes a little pause here, and he says, as I write these words, I am stunned by the coincidence that it is 1945, exactly 50 years after Sri Lahiri Mahashaya said that to Sri Yukteswar. And so this book is also a carrier wave for the mission of the masters in the world today. These great lives, Babaji, Lahiri, Sri Yukteswar, who would have heard of them if it had not been for this book? And moreover, who would have understood the unity of Christ directing the development of the spiritual development of the Western world and Babaji of the East? Who would have known that? So this book is a carrier way for our own personal development, but there's also the legacy of the advent of the avatars and explaining to the world who they are, the magnitude of their consciousness, and why they came to the world today. So without that book, no one would know this. And Babaji would be revered, Lahiri would be known by a handful of people, really. Sri Yukteswar, maybe fewer. And Master would have made an impression in the West, but it's when it's all put together and you see, oh my goodness, this is the carrier wave for the spiritual evolution of the planet at this time. That's Autobiography of a Yogi. It's an amazing thing. And without that book, we would be totally unaware and devoid of hope, particularly in this present time. We were talking with a friend, talking about all the problems in the world today, and he said, I would lose heart, but for the fact that I know that Babaji and Jesus are guiding the evolution of our planet right now. And that is what we can cling to, no matter what happens, to remember that. All the troubles in the world right now, it's a passing thing. It will pass. But the vision of the great masters, the advent of the avatars to transform society, that's what the Autobiography of a Yogi brings to us.
We would like to now invite questions. If somebody has some questions, we can continue on the themes of this morning. And of course, I don't think the questions need to be particular to this topic this afternoon, but if you have some, that's a good way for us to start. So is there any questions? Anybody want to raise their hand and be the brave spirit to start the discussion off? Is anybody out there? Jamal, you must have a question. He had such a smile on his face that my eyes went to go to somebody. So,
How do we get the most out of autobiography?
how do we get the most?
Out of reading Autobiography of a Yogi.
That's a good one. I'm going to ask our panel to answer that question. How do we get the most out of reading the Autobiography of a Yogi? Okay, I'll start. I think I think there are probably as many stories of reading the autobiography as there are people here now today. And probably each of you, when you read that book, it touched you like we've described for ourselves. You just wanted to devour it and you went right through it. And I think probably those of us who did do it that way, finishing it off in a couple of days of reading, we went right through, and certain things stood out for us. Our particular karma, maybe that's what it was, whatever it would have been. But for somebody else, it might have been something totally different in terms of the particulars. The vibration is what touched us. And so over the years, just like I bet most of you, have gone back and have reread it again and again and again. And it's amazing to me how many times, every time actually, I go back and read that book, I say, I don't remember this. And I said, I can't remember the details of it, and I do it again. And in reading it, I get new inspiration again. And I think how to get the most out of it, I don't know if I can't answer that definitively with one answer, but I know for me, I pick it up, I use it as a resource guide. Because I want to give a talk on something, and I go back and I use it in that way, and then you might say study it like a textbook. But on the other hand, I pick it up, like Devi mentioned. Sometimes I just open it and start reading right there, and once you open it in and you start going, you just keep right on going. Then I think you find what works for you to bring inspiration into your life. I think I read it, and then I meditate upon it, I think about it. And you read a story once, and you get a certain message off of that story. But then you read that story again, and there's another message in there. And you think you know that story, but yet you go deeper and deeper into it, and you start to get insights into deeper levels of it. And the lessons that come for it is particularly for those of you who have to, from time to time, give a discourse. You find that there are infinite number of ways that you can go in and study that. I think attunement is what it does for me. The autobiography of a yogi, I pick it up and I read it, and it brings me in tune. It reminds me of that first reading that I had, and that enthusiasm and that openness of heart that propelled me to take up this path. And so it brings that attunement back to me, and it's sacred in that way. And so now I'm going to ask the panel to share.
Just about bumped you off.
One is studying in a group is nice. I know there are different study groups that happen around Autobiography of a Yogi. And the other is, I really enjoy listening to Swamiji read Autobiography of a Yogi on the audio, the audio CD that we have. And he just brings so much heart and devotion. And the story when he talks about Master's meeting with Swami Sri Teswarji, he's nearly in tears. So listening to Swamiji read it is also a wonderful way to study it.
Comments? How to get the most out of it?
I'll add one more quick one. Getting the most out of it also implies how open you are when you read it. And so I think some of the times that I've gotten the most is when I've done a seclusion and I've been meditating deep and I've been withdrawn from activity and society so that my mind isn't restless and my heart isn't agitated. And then reading it, it's almost like there's a whole different teaching that comes across in the vibration more than the words. And it's almost like then it becomes hard to read because just a page or two and it fills you up. So try also to get yourself open before reading it. But we can't do that all the time. So read it every night, look at it every day, read it before you have to give a talk, do study groups with it. It'll keep talking and talking and talking to you. Don't try to I don't think we have to all answer every question.
Okay, I'll take the next question then. Okay, I'll take the first question then. Everything everyone said is true. You get, depending on your calmness and receptivity, you'll have a different experience. If you're looking at it as a source book, as a teacher, you'll have a different experience. If you have it by your bedside, and after you meditate in the evening, before you go to sleep, if you just read a page or two, that's all, and go to sleep with that in your mind, that's a very nice thing. So it's not so much studying it or, and you don't make a lot of progress through the book that way, and you can open it random or you can, just be sequential. But the more you can also, Swami said one of the ways to get attunement with the Guru is to look in his eyes. So just holding the book and looking at that beautiful face, if you never read a word, that could be your path to God. So look in the Guru's eyes and try to say, as though it was a mirror, that's who I am.
Thought came to me, that I would suspect what we've been speaking about is somewhat recognizable with everybody here. But you probably, a significant number of you have also had the experience. You were so excited of this book and you gave it to somebody and there was nothing. They just looked at you funny. What you want? And so I always, there must be a certain connection. There are those who it goes out as you might say, a signal it's calling. You remember the story of Ramakrishna, if you read his life, when his disciples had not yet come to him, and he would stand on the roof of his kutir, and he would call. He says, my disciples, come to me, come. And he would send that broadcast out. And slowly, one by one, of course, they all did come. And so I suspect it was the same thing. Master, he's got this great big family, and he sends it out, and people come. And it has a great power. And I think that will continue in the years ahead. When Sadhana Devi and I were in the East Coast of America, I came to this. We tried to do programs, and we would go out and talk and try to encourage enthusiasm of people to come and share these teachings. And it was an uphill battle most of the time that we were there. But then I looked back after a few years of the people who had joined our Sangha there. And of the ones that we had gone out doing programs through meditation programs, very, very few came because of our going out and spreading the message out. Most of the people came because they said, oh, I read this book, and that's what brought them. And then we were there to receive them. In other words, the book had gone out to call people, but then they wondered, what do I do now? Now what do I do? And they have to have somehow to follow that. And of course, in that situation, they would go on to the internet and they would Google and they would see that there was this place in this little country place where we were, and they would come. And I think that still applies. People come to Ananda because they had read this book, but unless there's somebody there to follow up and to be able to share and give them a way to be able to go on, you might say the timing, they lose that inspiration. So many times we've heard this story, and then here is people, oh yeah, I read that book 10 years ago, but I didn't know what to do about it. And then I say, well, come on in, come on in. And I think this is our role, and I think each of our roles here. We have read that book, we've been touched, we're here, and other people, it's not that you have to go out there and do anything, but when somebody inquires, you share with them. And I think that in that way, we become the channels of being able to share this message, just to share. That's what Swami always used to say. We don't have to teach anybody. But if we share, then we become instruments for Master, and we become instruments for the autobiography and the message, because where joy is, joy naturally wants to be shared with other people, and we just do the natural thing and share. And then other people, and more people, when the time is right, each one at their own appointed time will ultimately come to these teachings. This lifetime or in the future. Now, more questions. We need a question. Here we go, Gorgia. You're doing the needful here. So, yeah, you better speak into that for the record.
Can you hear me?
I haven't heard you. Well,
Okay.
Let's start talking. Let's see.
I'll say loudly. So in Ananda, we have a supportive environment, and if you make a mistake, people don't pounce on you. They try to help you and they forgive you. But out in the world, it's not like that. So when somebody makes a mistake, and let's say they make many mistakes, they're treated in a mean manner for those mistakes, which were unintentional. So my question is, if somebody speaks rudely to you or very derogatorily, how do you still respond with love? And like, for example, Swamiji said kindness is its own reward. Can you just explain how that is true, or how we can do that? Be kind.
How can you be kind in adverse conditions when the world is not all that kind to us? Now, I've been up here talking away, so I have to somewhat. Now, which one is?
Devi and I have a 2-hour head start.
Oh, you've got a head start. Now, Dhyana, now come on now. How do you be kind? Well, philosophically, I could answer that. Obviously, we don't take things personally. It's because people are. This world can be an unkind place. And Master would say, he actually, in his writings, he say, don't be too sensitive. Don't be too sensitive. Now, this doesn't mean to be insensitive. I'm not saying that. It's because there's different shades of this language here. But don't be sensitive to what's happening by other people's likes and dislikes, their upsets. These things. They're going to act, and they're going to say things, and they're going to do things that are going to be directed to you, and you're going to be hurt. You're going to be felt that they were unkind. So one is don't be sensitive to them, because if you're sensitive to them, what's going to happen? You're going to react to them, and you're not really going to be useful to be able to help that person, to be able to perhaps get that person a larger understanding. And so obviously, but that's easy said. And that's why I said it's easy said and not so easy to do so often, because when people treat us in a way that's thoughtless on their side. But I think I think what we have to do is we have to, even, and this is the spiritual tradition of all religions, is even in the midst of unkindness, if we're a serious student, and you are, and I think all of the people here, a serious student of the spiritual path, we know that we have to return. We can't return it on that level. We have to somehow metamorphose that energy into something higher and return blessings. Somebody slaps you, and you're able to return kindness to that, and not in that same vein. It's our you might say it's our spiritual duty as disciples to represent Master as what would Master do in this situation. Now, Master, of course, was a warrior. Somebody treats them unkind, he probably could have taken on his warrior samskars from way past and obviously defeated somebody and treated them back. But he would try to win people over with love. He'd win them over with humor. He'd win them over with deflection of turning something back in a kind way back to that person. He tried to, that person is, you have to, if you realize when somebody treats us unkindly, the first thing is to realize it's their problem. They're trying to make it your problem, but it's really they're suffering. They are the ones who are suffering, and if they were not suffering, they wouldn't speak that way, and they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. And so if you can hold on to that thought, which is what compassion was mentioned this morning, they were talking about compassion, is to see people and as according to the bigger picture, that they're beautiful souls, but darkness has affected them. And even the greatest of people, the great, the wonderful, I mean, maybe not on the highest level, but people who are wonderful souls, wonderful disciples, they have down periods too. And those down periods, they perhaps have come down a little bit to act unkindly to one another, and friends do this to one another sometimes. We have to remember and see them on the highest level. Now, this is not easy to do, but it's our duty to do as disciples, is to see one another as disciples, and even those who are not on our path, to see them on that level. On the other hand, remember, you don't ever want to let anybody abuse you. It's not, but we don't have to hit them on the head either. And so you have to hiss a little bit sometime, like that story of the snake, but with a clean heart. And just because you don't ever want to let somebody go too far in that way, because it's not good for them. It just stimulates that. So this is a hard lesson. It's a hard lesson, but we have to start first with ourselves. Don't be too sensitive. Keep Masters, keep ourselves in Masters world, and be an instrument for actually trying to uplift that other person out of their darkness. Now, I bet I've said something that you don't all figure out. He didn't say this or that. Now.
Just quickly, so, Gorja, sometimes there are people who are in our life or in our family, in our world, that we just don't get along with. And it could be past life karma, and, in some instances, Swamiji or Master talked about people who were enemies in other lifetimes, and they had karma to work out. And so sometimes that happens. It's not like you can like everybody loves you and likes you. It just isn't the way this world is set up. But I found that two things. One, always strengthening myself, thinking about how can I get stronger myself, how can I be less sensitive, how can I be less emotional through the practices that we have. So one is strengthening yourself. The other one is getting out of yourself and being expansive, meaning through prayer, through our healing prayers, and you probably do the healing prayers anyway. And I have found that it takes time sometimes. It's not like, okay, I prayed and now they love me. It could be years that karma is finally worked out. And if it could be, I'm saying a more extreme case, but don't give up hope. Get offered to Master, if it's your parents or a brother or sister or somebody at work,
And I would just keep praying for them, praying for them, praying for me that I could not react. And then I always found that Master found just the right moment. I mean, not in every case, but that something just happened and I had to either face them or somehow it melted away or something happened. So what I'm saying is don't be passive about it. Oh, it'll go away. It typically doesn't really just go away. You can work things out through Kriya as well, as you know, what Swamiji talked about offering in the Kriya to God. But I think more than anything, strengthen yourself and then give the rest to Divine Mother. We can't solve all the problems of this universe. It's up to her. So.
One of the most powerful experiences of fending off negative emotions from others that we ever had to go through, and I hope none of you ever have to go through, was when Ananda was sued some years ago. And it was brutal, it was ruthless. The lawyers were very unscrupulous and unrelenting. And I remember at one point, I just was so discouraged. We were with Swami. We were staying in the Bay Area of San Francisco because that's where the trial was being held. And I just thought I cannot bear this level of negative energy being directed at us anymore. And then the phone rang and it was Swami. He was staying in another apartment from where we were staying. And he said, "Oh, can you come over and help me fold my shirts?" You know, it was just an excuse for me to come over. So I went because he knew I just was at the breaking point. I can't deal with this much negativity being pushed at us anymore. And he didn't say anything about anything. Then I was folding the shirts and I was about to leave. And he said, "What is our choice? To become like them?" And that's all he said. And I just realized that whatever people put out, our choice is not to put out that level. Whatever unkindness or negativity, that's our choice. We have control. And when he said that, I just turned everything around for me because I thought, no, I never want to be like them. I never want to become like that. And I will continue, no matter what happens, to try to be as kind and understanding a person I can. Because I think he saw what was happening to me as I was becoming a little bitter inside. How come people act this way? And he didn't want me to go that way. So it's easy to get bitter in the world when you see how people act. But don't let as Jaya was saying, it's their problem. Don't let their negativity make you a negative person. Sir, you had a question.
See, even if somebody reads this autobiography of the book, many people, but till the master calls them, they are not understand. It happened with me 25 years ago. Couple of times I kept it with me. I gave to many people. Couple of times I got an invite or something from my son. But when I went to Dubai, I got a book about biology, gifted to me. I read that and kept it also. But it so happened that last year I saw Ananda's ad and your ad. I autobiography almost every day before going to bed. But unless he calls and he feels you're ready,
That's it.
you read something. So
No.
that's the call everybody has to take.
That's a very good point. And also, wanted to add that, but you've made the point, sir, so I will go on. I have one older brother who's a very fine man. We were very close as children. But when I came to Ananda, this was many years ago, 50 years ago almost, he was upset. He said, "I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't want to have anything." And I said, okay. And we kind of went our separate ways. But he watched me, and he watched me. And then Swami Kriyananda was giving a talk in Los Angeles, where my brother lives. And he came to the talk, and he went up to Swami. And I had no idea what he was going to say. I hoped it wouldn't be bad. But he went up to Swami, and I was standing nearby, and he said, Thank you for the life you have given my sister. And he began meditating. And he was down at Master's Hermitage in Encinitas, just meditating on the grounds. So 50 years had passed. He's older than I am, so he's not a young man. And he was meditating there, and one of the nuns, the SRF nuns, came up to him and said, "Come, I want to bring you into Master's room. My brother told me this." And I said, "Do you know how rare that is? Even if you have an appointment, they don't take you into the room." But and then my brother said, "And when I meditated there, I could see Yogananda standing there." And 50 years. So we don't know. You can give someone a book and they can say, "Oh, I'm not interested in that." But, you know, it works on people's consciousness. So if you have people you love who are suffering, give them the book. If they reject it, okay, but still something will happen. So.
Did
It's more of a discussion I'm hoping this will come from you all. In Divine Friendship, Swamiji writes at one point after going through the lawsuit that no one person or organization can outline the entire mission of Yogananda. And he said in time we'll see much more outreach happening. So I just want to know, you all have been with Swamiji, who one after the other produced so many aspects of Master's mission. What can we expect in the future? How can this diversify more?
Well, actually, Swami would say that in one form or another many times. He basically that when he would talk, people would, sometimes that question would come up in the format where people would ask Swamiji, "What's Ananda's future? And what do you see in the future for us spreading this work?" And he said many times, he said, Ananda itself cannot encapsulate all of Yogananda's work. And he said he saw in the future that there would be people who have particular, you might say Swami's work was, he described his work as Master's mission or Master's teachings was in the center and like a wheel. And from that hub, many spokes went out to the wheel on the rim. And Swami said his writing and his nature was to write about many of those spokes and to draw through those spokes of interest, touch many people as he could, to draw them all to the center, which was Master's teachings. But of course, as one person, he could not express every aspect of Master's work, and even Master himself, when he asked Master, "Hasn't everything been written already about?" And he says, "Oh, don't." Master said, "Don't say that. Much more needs to be done." And Swami took it up as to be one person to express Master in many different ways, showing how his teachings applied. But there have been others as well there's been many disciples who have taken that, and I think in the future there are aspects of people's interest that need to be developed and will be developed, and showing how Master's teachings apply to that and how Master can be brought into that teachings brought into that world. I've mentioned this to a few people. I've been over the last 2 years, I've been going back and forth to China once or twice a year. And obviously, because of the political situation in the country like that, our work cannot develop there like it is here, because it's just not compatible with the system. Unless that system changes, which probably is not going to happen in my lifetime. So you could see, but yet there is this energy that has come into the world, and we have to realize Master's mission, Master's vibration, Babaji's vibration, the vibrations have come into the world, and they use organizations, they use as channels, they use individuals as channels. But they're only channels, only instruments. They are not the vibration itself. And as time goes by, everything changes, and new expressions it'll have to find channels appropriate to the situation that arises in this world. And so this is the thought in my mind, that masters, these teachings of Kriya Yoga, these teachings of Master's mission, which Master predicted would touch people in every land in this country and spread to all countries, have to find the appropriate channel and the appropriate means by which that'll happen. In some countries, it'll be very obvious. In other countries, such as a country like China, it's going to have to find its own way, because it's the individuals, you see, whose hearts are being touched. People's hearts are touched in every country, and that outward expression of how those people will find God, how they'll come together, how they'll associate with each other, what's going to motivate them, are going to have to take individual expression in each country. And as time goes by, in a century, 2 centuries, 5 centuries from now, 1,000 years from now, same thing will have to happen. There's going to be no one cup can possibly hold the ocean, and we're but one cup here. But there's obviously a need and inevitability for many cups, but it's the same water in those cups. Sometimes it looks a little shaded slightly differently according to the minerals, you might say, but it's the same water in all of them. And so I'll use that as my introduction to Jyotish. Is going to see what it says.
I'll touch on an aspect of this because we need to work creatively with Master's teachings. But there are 2 aspects to it. If we try to work creatively by thinking that we can change the truths in Master's teachings, he didn't understand this, I'm going to explain it. Or he's old-fashioned. You know, he came from the 1920s, and now we're 100 years later, and he's old-fashioned in his thinking, and I'm going to bring his teachings up to date by doing something. So we have to understand that the truths that he talks about and in his teachings are going to go on for 2,000, 5,000 years. And if we think that it's our job to change those, then we would be better to step out of the way, because that's wrong. The application of those teachings, trying to stay very fundamentally aligned with those teachings, but then to ask the question, how does the teaching apply to education? How does it apply to medicine? How does it apply to counseling? How does it apply to working in the world? So the application of the teachings is going to need all of our efforts to spread that out. Swamiji said about his books that they were just seeds, and he wanted whole gardens to grow from those seeds. But let's say one seed was an apple tree. He didn't want a garden of thorn bushes to grow from that seed. He wanted thousands of different apple trees. So we have to stay orthodox on one hand and very creative on the other.